Sir Colonel Potter, my last wish is to be buried in my mom's wedding dress. All of these dodges have been around for 40 years. Thrown out. Imagine watching American TV without MASH. It's hard, right? That's because the show was well-liked by many people. It changed the way sitcoms could be. When it first aired in 1972, in the last few years of the Vietnam War, MASH was set in the Korean War and had both funny and sad moments. She told me I was having a bad relationship. I then asked, "Was that one of my doctors?" "No," she said, "it was your priest." Its strange figures looked at how silly war is and how strong people are. It became a fan favorite very quickly, but behind the scenes the show was always changing. As it got more political and had more complicated character arcs, tensions sometimes rose. A number of well-liked stars finally made the hard decision to leave. Did they quit for personal or business reasons, or because of problems with creativity? It might surprise you why. Let us look more closely at what took place. A story about war that has heart. This one has a lot to unpack, but let's go back in time and see how this famous series came to be. The story of MASH, like many other great TV shows, starts in a book, not on TV. Back in 1968, Dr. Richard Hooker, who was really a pen name for Colonel H. Richard Hornberger, wrote a book called MASH, about 3 Army doctors. The book was a made-up story about his time as a doctor in a mobile army hospital during the Korean War. The book quickly became a hit and caught the attention of Hollywood because it had a mix of dark humor, touching moments, and unpleasant truths. The novel was turned into the satirical black comedy MASH by director Robert Altman 2 years after it came out. The movie was both flippant and serious. Don Sutherland played Hawkeye Pierce in the movie, and Elliot Gould played Trapper John. A lot of people were moved by it, especially since the Vietnam War was still fresh in people's minds. The movie quickly did well with both critics and audiences. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and the Academy Award for Best Screenplay. But the idea really took off in culture when CBS turned it into a weekly TV show 2 years later. The TV show version of MASH started on September 17, 1972, and was created by Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds. It kept the military setting and strange humor but switched to a more serialized, character-driven style that let the stories get deeper and more emotional. The show's star, Alan Alda, quickly became Hawkeye Pierce after taking over the part. CBS took a chance and moved the show to Saturday nights, even though the first season had such low ratings that it almost wasn't renewed. It got a lot of viewers after this move. What the show did to culture also changed. A lot of people thought the show also broke the rules. It was the first movie of its kind in Hollywood, and it used real war footage and tried new formats. It was also one of the first American comedies to use the sound of helicopters instead of a laugh track. Alan O'Brien. He later became a director, writer, and creative force behind the show, asking for it to be more realistic and have more emotional depth. But the people in MASH grew up as well, and let's just say that not all the players were on board with the new plan. Some people thought their parts were getting smaller or that they were turning into stereotypes. Others were having problems in their personal lives or wanted to try new artistic paths. MASH had a lot of cast changes over the course of its 11 seasons, but the show always had one goal: to show the cost of war through the lens of kindness, humor, and strong human bonds. So let's get right to the first big ending of the series. The actor's departure came as such a shock that the writers decided to kill off his character in a way that shocked the whole country. John McClane Stevenson, if you ask longtime MASH fans what scene made them cry the most, they'll probably say the last scene of Season 3. Abyssinia, William. Nobody heard the radar send the one line, but it changed everything. Over the Sea of Japan, Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down. Nobody made it out alive. Not only did that scene shock people, but it was also the first time a main cast member on MASH, McClane Stevenson, left the show in a big way. How did we get there, though? McClane had been an important part of MASH from the start. Colonel Henry Blake, his character, was the friendly but sometimes confused leader of the 4077th. He was the perfect contrast to the chaos of war. Henry Blake brought humanity to the world, where Hawkeye and Trapper brought defiance and wit. They are sometimes stressed out and sometimes lost for words, but they always mean well. In the first few seasons, McClane's work won him a Golden Globe and a lot of praise. Fans loved him a lot because he was funny, and funny to them. Things weren't quite as peaceful behind the scenes, though. Interviews and autobiographies of the cast and writers say that McClane became more and more unhappy with his part. Even though the show began as a loose group comedy, Hawkeye Pierce, played by Alan Alda, quickly became the main character. And as Alda worked on writing and directing the show more, his character gained more depth and importance in the story. McClane, on the other hand, felt left out. So little attention that he told People magazine in 1975, "I want to be number one." It's been all about how these stars left to go their separate ways, but what about those who quit because the show made them feel so badly? Gary Berghoff. Even though he was the team's heart, Gary Berghoff didn't leave MASH with a lot of fanfare or joy. He left quietly and painfully, and most people will never fully understand why. For fans, Gary was Radar O'Reilly, the wide-eyed office worker with very good instincts, with a war in one arm and a stuffed bear in the other. People who used Radar could hear airplanes before anyone else. He was sweet and innocent, almost like a child, which made the battlefield less unpleasant. Hawkeye and Trapper broke the rules and Henry Blake was bad at being a leader, but Radar was the 4077th's glue, soul, and some might even say mental heartbeat. But behind that soft voice and nervous smile was an actress who was slowly falling apart from the stress of it all. Only Gary played the same part in this movie as he did in the 1970 original. He added a weakness to Radar that wasn't there in the movie by doing this. Radar in the movie was more naughty and even a little sleazy. But on TV, Gary turned Radar into something unforgettable, a sign of how innocent people lost their lives during the war. In fact, his performance was so famous that many people thought he could never be replaced. Still, by season 7, there were signs of weakness. Gary was having problems at work and in his home life. The long hours needed to make MASH and his own need to be perfect started to wear him down. Had long-term problems with anxiety and depression, which didn't get much attention at the time but made it hard for him to handle the demands of shooting. The pain of being away from his family was another thing. Gary was married and had a young girl by the late 1970s, but he was never at home because he worked so many hours on set. He even said later that missing his daughter's early years was a mistake that he would always feel bad about. In an interview in 2018, co-star Mike Farrow talked about how he had less screen time so he could take care of his personal life. Radar was very important to the show, so the producers did their best to make things work for him. Gary was given more time off and fewer shows each season at one point, but it wasn't enough for him. He was done with how he felt. So, in season 8, he had to make the tough choice to leave MASH for good. But unlike Wayne, this time the show didn't let him go without a fuss. Goodbye Radar, a 2-part goodbye episode for Radar, had one of the saddest plots in the whole show. In it, Radar comes back from vacation to find that the 4077th has been falling apart while he was away. Like always, he tries to fix everything at first, but in the end, he knows it's time to move on. He needs to go home to his mother. The farm where he lives is in trouble. Radar may have finally grown up. Almost nothing is said in the episode's last scene. Radar was walking away, leaving his teddy bear on Hawkeye's bunk and setting off into the Korean sky. That moment made me feel a lot of different things. It said everything that the show couldn't, and the people in the crowd felt that loss, because seeing him go was like saying goodbye to our own youth. Gary didn't work for a long time after MASH. He showed up on a few shows, including a short-lived knockoff called Walter, in which Radar becomes a rookie police officer. It almost took off, but it didn't. In the end, he decided to quit Hollywood for good and focus on art, protecting wildlife, and coming up with new ideas. You heard that right, making things. He had a number of inventions, one for a system for fishing tackle. His love of nature quickly turned into a safe place for him to escape the stresses of fame and the mental damage MASH had done to him. In the end, Gary said that he quit because of 2 things, my family and being tired. To put my life back together again, and who could blame me? Gary's life is quiet now. He doesn't talk to many people, he's not after the attention. Fans will sometimes see him at a gathering or read a rare quote that makes them think of the sweet kid, and the big ears that let them hear helicopters before anyone else. Moving on to the man who played Larry Linville, one of the funniest bad guys on TV, it is hard to picture early MASH without the rigid, petty, and utterly self-important figure Frank Burns. Larry Linville did a great job as Major Burns, the figure that people loved to hate. Because he was so obsessed with rules, had an affair with Major Houlihan, and felt very bad about himself, he was the perfect funny foil for Hawkeye and Trapper. It became clear that Frank was only a one-note bad guy as the show went on, which wasn't a good thing. Frank stayed in a loop while other characters got deeper. His fears never went away, and no one ever tried to change his biases. And Larry, an actor who had a lot more range than he could show, began to feel the stress. Larry made a big choice by the end of season 5. He didn't want to keep his job. He said that was as far as he could go with the figure. He wasn't fired or pushed to do something, he just walked away. Frank became aware that MASH was rising beyond his limited role, and the effect was huge. There were more complex moral issues on the show after Frank left. There was no longer a need for a bad guy in cartoons. Instead of slapstick and cruelty, the humor could come from irony and kindness. We like to think that Larry's leaving was a creative turning point for MASH in many ways, one that would make it famous instead of just good. Fans still felt the loss, though. Frank was the joke and the stress for 5 seasons. When he left, the show had to rethink its flow. His departure wasn't sad in the show's plot, but he was written out of the story as getting a nice raise. It was deeply ingrained in the show. Lawrence had other small parts in movies and TV shows, but none were as well known or memorable as Major Frank Burns. Somebody else was written into the show to kind of take Larry's place after he was written out. That someone else would also leave the show later. John David Ogden Stiers. If Frank Burns was the bad guy in the cartoon, Charles Emerson Winchester III was the one who burned slowly. When Winchester took over for Frank in season 6, things couldn't have been more different. He was smart, cocky, private, and well-educated, so he was more than just an enemy. Hawkeye, BJ, and even the tone of the show itself found him hard to deal with. David Ogden Stiers played him with great control. At first, Winchester seemed haughty and annoying, but as time went on, holes started to appear. He wasn't cruel, he was just careful. He wasn't mean, but he might have been a little proud. Under all the opera and wine talk, there was a man dealing with the harsh truth of war, one patient at a time. David didn't quit in the middle of the series like Larry and the others did. He watched until the very end, and he didn't leave in anger. He left to end the story poetically. One of the most hauntingly beautiful scenes in TV history is when he teaches Chinese prisoners of war to play Mozart. That was Winchester's power. He wasn't there to be liked. People who think they are too good to be hurt by war are wrong. He was there to tell us of this. David turned down the chance to join the spin-off show after MASH because he felt that his character's story was over. He had said what he needed to say with those words. After his success on the show, he went on to voice Disney characters. In an interview with the website Gossip Boy in 2009, he told them his name was Dave and that he was happy to be gay. He said he hadn't come out earlier in his career because he was afraid it would hurt his chances in the business, especially since he was still doing voice work for Disney and acting in movies and TV shows. At the time, people were really afraid that coming out could cost them parts or make them fit into certain types of roles. Even though he kept his personal life quiet for most of his work, he was very well respected in his field. For his honor and his wide range of skills, the disease killed him in 2018 when he was 75 years old. Not only will his acts live on, but so will the quiet courage it took for him to live his truth on his own terms. Some people deserve special thanks, though, so we can't end this show without them. The women in this show usually played supporting and background parts, but they were very important to how the tone of the show developed. Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, also known as the Women of MASH, was one of these women. In a war zone was full of guys telling jokes to keep the darkness away. It was harder for the women of MASH to be seen in that area. Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan was the only woman who had to go up a harder path or go through a more dramatic change. She was played by Loretta Swit. At the start of MASH, Margaret was meant to be a joke. The name of her pet cat, Hot Lips, which comes from a joke in the original movie, said it all. She always did things the right way and was often made fun of for it. Loretta wouldn't let Margaret stay in that box, though. She gave the role more intelligence, strength, and vulnerability with each season. By the end of the show, Margaret wasn't just liked, she was admired. She was fully realized, complicated, and gently changing the world. Loretta once said in an interview, "I wanted her to be a strong woman." She was, too. Margaret was a decorated officer, a skilled head nurse, and one of the few characters who publicly questioned how cruel the war was while still doing her job perfectly. Loretta stayed with MASH for all 11 seasons, while many of the male players left. She was one of only 4 players who were in both the starting episode and the ending. Female figures who appeared more than once, like Lieutenant Ginger Bayliss or Nurse Cutler, came and went, but Margaret stayed and changed. Margaret stood tall in a show where war made everyone look their worst. The only woman in the opening credits was Loretta's tenacity. She made sure that the boys didn't carry the show by themselves. Who did we forget to put in? Tell us in the space below. Thanks for seeing. Click play on the video you want to watch to see more fun movies. Also, don't forget to hit the bell, like, and follow so you know when a new video comes out.